The coming emergency will not announce itself with a stock market crash, but as a quietly worded directive or a fresh executive order labeling your personal supplies as excess inventory subject to seizure. By the moment enforcement begins, that everyday item will have vanished from every retailer in your region. This is not wild speculation. It mirrors the N95 mask disappearances of 2020 exactly. It repeats what happened with rubber fuel and sugar in 1942, and the pattern is already returning. We are breaking down 11 critical provisions sharp survivalists are acquiring silently right now before the legal landscape shifts permanently. You have heard endless advice about preparing for grid failures, food shortages, and hurricanes. Almost no one discusses the kind of stockpiling that becomes a criminal act the instant an official state of emergency is declared. Governments do not confiscate abundance. They legislate scarcity, and every object on this list travels the shortest path from retail availability to purchase quotas and prohibition. Some of these items still sit on big box shelves for under $20, but 6 weeks after a national event, acquiring them legally will be impossible. Focus closely on the third entry because veteran survivalists erased it from public forums due to automated moderation. The very first entry already faces legal barriers in 3 states, and the public largely failed to notice. Item 11 involves stockpiling ammunition in common calibers. The swiftest mechanism for a governing body to dismantle private defense is not firearm confiscation. It is ammunition prohibition. A reliable rifle can last a lifetime with minimal parts, but ammunition is consumed constantly through practice hunting and protective use. Legal restriction arrived in places like California, New York, and New Jersey through purchase volume limits, transaction frequency caps, and point-of-sale background investigations. During a genuine upheaval, the progression is predictable daily rationing restrictions by bullet diameter and obligatory multi-day waiting periods. Store shelves empty not because production halts, but because every wholesaler suddenly must authenticate, document, and report every sale. Secure standard rounds immediately, 9mm 5.56 long rifle and 12-gauge shells, and avoid obscure ammunition types. The common blunder is hoarding rounds for a custom firearm while neglecting the backup weapon you will realistically grab under extreme stress. 1,000 rounds of .22 long rifle currently costs roughly $80, and during the chaos buying of 2020, that quantity surged to $250. Remain attentive because the 10th entry is an item rarely classified as survival gear until its availability evaporates. Number 10 concerns potassium iodide tablets, which shield the thyroid gland from radioactive iodine released during nuclear incidents. After Fukushima, pharmacy stock nationwide depleted within 3 days, and online prices rose from $15 past $200. A federal cache exists, but deployment prioritizes populations within a 10-mile radius of nuclear installations, leaving those 30 miles away with nothing. The instant a radiological event occurs, commercial purchasing halts. Health agencies impose distribution constraints and pharmacies withdraw inventory. Adults require roughly 130 milligrams daily during active exposure, and children need reduced dosages, so avoid buying a single container for a household. Tablets remain potent for about 5 to 7 years in dry conditions. So mark expiration dates and schedule replacements like preserved food. Number 9 shifts focus to long-duration antibiotics, and that is why fish antibiotics once occupied an unspoken corner of survivalist supply rooms. The chemically identical formulations amoxicillin, doxycycline, ciprofloxacin remained accessible without a medical prescription when marketed for aquarium use. That legal gap has been narrowing fast. Numerous states already constrain over-the-counter distribution of veterinary-grade antibiotics, and the federal agency responsible seeks to eliminate the remainder. When the subsequent disaster strikes, prescription pharmaceuticals are the first category subject to rationing. Medical centers claim priority. Retail pharmacies face strict supply quotas. Anyone suffering from a persistent bacterial ailment, a tooth abscess, or an infected laceration ends up stranded at the terminus of an impossible queue. Without antibiotic intervention, a minor puncture from rusted metal turns fatal within a week. A child's streptococcus infection escalates into rheumatic fever. Conditions regarded as trivial during ordinary times become lethal when antibiotic access vanishes. These medications remain potent far longer than conventional wisdom suggests. Investigations into military pharmaceutical reserves revealed many formulations retained over 90% efficacy. a decade to 15 years beyond their stated expiration when stored in cool, dark, and moisture-free conditions. Rotate your supply every 5 to 7 years for optimal safety. If veterinary-labeled antibiotics remain purchasable in your jurisdiction, prices range from $20 to $40 per container of 30 tablets. Once federal gatekeeping solidifies, every single dose will require a medical prescription. The eighth entry represents something the entire readiness community discreetly amasses while never categorizing it openly. Number 8 covers two-way radio communication devices. The initial infrastructure to collapse in any genuine emergency is the cellular network. The next casualty is the public broadcast information stream. The third development which catches the majority off guard is the rapid legal reclassification of unmonitored radio transmissions. Currently, a basic handheld unit costs approximately $30. It transmits and receives on frequencies that regulatory bodies do not actively police during peacetime. Amateur licensing frameworks exist, yet the hardware itself faces no purchasing restrictions presently. That status transforms during a disaster. The Communications Commission holds emergency authority on the books to commandeer bandwidth, enforce mandatory registration, and absolutely prohibit civilian broadcasting on designated spectrum ranges. This has occurred in isolated disaster zones previously. In an authentic infrastructure collapse, anticipate it becoming nationwide policy rapidly. The nuance most individuals miss is the operational distinction between receiving signals and transmitting them. Owning a scanner that exclusively listens remains seldom regulated. Possessing a unit capable of broadcasting is precisely what attracts enforcement. Sharp survivalists acquire both categories, a dedicated monitoring scanner and a separate handheld transmitter to be activated solely when necessary. Decent handheld radios require a $60 total investment. A scanner equipped with weather alerts adds roughly $100 more. The expenditure is trivial relative to becoming the sole individual in your vicinity, possessing real-time intelligence when mass media goes silent. Our next item is something omitted from virtually every conventional survival inventory, and that exclusion makes it critical. Number 7 directs attention to calcium hypochlorite for water purification. Filtration devices monopolize public attention. Chemical sterilization gets disregarded entirely, and that is a severe oversight. A quality filter handles bacteria and protozoa effectively. It does not reliably neutralize viruses, specific industrial pollutants, or chemical spill contaminants. Calcium hypochlorite, the identical compound utilized for swimming pool sanitation, eliminates everything. A filter bypasses costs virtually nothing per application and treats thousands of gallons from a single pound of granular material. Here is the component that becomes restricted in the aftermath of major security events. Bulk acquisitions of pool treatment chemicals became flagged transactions. Some states now mandate identification for quantities exceeding specific weight limits. During a genuine crisis, expect this to constrict dramatically. The identical substances that render water potable can, under different concentration ratios, be employed for purposes authorities actively seek to prevent. Consequently, when legal barriers emerge, they target the compound itself, not the intended use. 1 teaspoon of granular calcium hypochlorite, when diluted correctly, treats over 5,000 gallons of water. You do not require a massive drum, a single airtight vessel, the dimensions of a coffee canister suffices. Stored bone dry and hermetically sealed, it endures 5 to 10 years. The critical blunder is acquiring liquid bleach for extended storage. Liquid bleach degrades significantly within 6 months. Granular calcium hypochlorite, properly sealed, represents a decade-long asset. A 2-pound container costs roughly $20 at most swimming pool retailers. Once federal monitoring tightens, anticipate mandatory identification protocols, acquisition logs, or outright prescription model restrictions. Acquire it immediately. The 6th entry is something you have unquestionably walked past in hardware stores while never mentally cataloging it as survival equipment. Number 6 involves fuel containers and stabilization chemistry. Fuel accessibility restrictions manifest faster than any other limitation during a major crisis. This occurred during the 1973 embargo. It repeated during Hurricane Sandy, and it will inevitably recur. Limitations on volume, designated purchasing windows, even identification prerequisites at fueling stations appear instantly. The detail no one highlights is the secondary choke point: the physical containers themselves. Multiple states already curtail the sale of large-capacity fuel receptacles under the guise of environmental protection statutes. Those regulations do not dissolve during an emergency. Enforcement intensifies. If you do not already possess enough 5-gallon containers to warehouse a meaningful fuel reserve, acquiring them when necessity peaks may prove legally impossible. The cans become rationed goods before the fuel itself faces distribution controls. Then the stabilizer complication emerges. Untreated gasoline transforms into engine-clogging varnish inside your storage tank within 6 months. Fuel treated with a quality-stabilizing additive remains chemically viable for 2 to 3 years. Most survivalists stockpile the gasoline and completely forget the stabilization chemistry, a mistake that annihilates the entire fuel reserve. Even with stabilizer added, cycle through your stored fuel every 12 to 18 months by using it in your daily vehicle, then refill the storage containers fresh. 5 gallons of gasoline currently costs around $20. A container of fuel stabilizer adds 15 more and treats up to 80 gallons. 5 clean containers, 50 gallons rotated annually, and you possess weeks of generator operational capacity or hundreds of miles of evacuation radius. The following entry is the one most people completely mishandle. Number 5 focuses on off-grid energy storage stations. Photovoltaic panels themselves face virtually no prohibition risk. They are too deeply integrated into the national energy framework. What becomes legally constrained is the inversion equipment and the battery reservoir, the subsystems enabling you to utilize solar generation independent of the utility infrastructure. Several jurisdictions have already codified mandates requiring grid-connected solar arrays to deactivate during outages to protect utility repair crews. The practical result is that at the precise instant you most desperately require electricity, your expensive solar installation becomes non-functional architectural decoration. The remedy is independent off-grid storage, a portable power station coupled with dedicated portable panels. These units maintain no grid communication whatsoever. They harvest sunlight, produce alternating current output, and can sustain a refrigerator for a day or two. Inexpensive power stations fail after roughly 300 charge-discharge cycles. Premium lithium iron phosphate units endure 3,000 cycles. The upfront cost differential appears significant, but amortized across a decade of service, the quality unit costs substantially less per cycle than its cheaper counterpart. The pervasive mistake is purchasing the least expensive option and discovering it completely non-functional 2 years later. A robust 1,000-watt power station with accompanying portable panels requires a total investment of approximately $1,200. New utility regulations concerning disconnection protocols, equipment registration, and mandatory inspections are already circulating in draft form. Acquire unregulated equipment now while the regulatory framework remains porous. The fourth entry is something every survivalist has heard discussed, and almost none have actually accumulated. Number 4 addresses heirloom seed varieties. Contemporary hybrid seeds, the type stocked at every gardening retail outlet, yield a single productive harvest. The seeds collected from that harvest are either sterile or produce inferior subsequent generations. This is an intentional biological design feature ensuring seed corporations maintain repeat customer dependency. During an ordinary growing season, this limitation is manageable. During a crisis where agricultural supply chains disintegrate, this becomes a generational catastrophe. Heirloom seeds breed genetically true. The tomatoes harvested this year produce identical fruit next year and every year thereafter. A modest investment in heirloom cultivars like beans, squash, tomatoes, corn, peppers, and leafy greens transforms into a self-replicating food production system. Stored correctly in mylar pouches with desiccant sachets, sealed and kept in cool, dark environments, heirloom seeds maintain viability for 5 to 10 years. The widespread blunder involves purchasing a generic emergency seed assortment and assuming universal geographic compatibility. A tomato variety adapted to Florida humidity will struggle desperately in Colorado aridity. Source from a regional seed producer cultivating stock under conditions mirroring your local environment. Open pollinated heirloom heritage and locally adapted are the 3 attributes forming the essential selection criteria. A quality seed vault containing 20 varieties costs approximately $50. During a severe societal disruption, Anticipate emergency agricultural requisition or centralized distribution oversight. Accumulate now, store hermetically, and master cultivation of at least 3 varieties before survival depends upon it. Our upcoming entry is the one nobody discusses in public forums. Number 3 pertains to personal ballistic protection. Civilian body armor remains legally purchasable in 48 states currently. New York and Connecticut have already restricted civilian access, limiting it exclusively to law enforcement and military personnel. Additional states introduce comparable prohibition legislation during every legislative cycle. The trajectory is unmistakable. Civilian access to plate carriers and ballistic armor panels is constricting rapidly. A Level 3 steel armor plate costs roughly $100. A complete plate carrier configuration, including vest front and rear plates and side protection, totals approximately $400. This expenditure secures equipment capable of defeating most rifle projectiles a civilian might realistically encounter. The pertinent question is not whether you will ever require it, but whether you could legally purchase it 5 years from now without navigating background checks, registration databases, and mandatory waiting periods. Steel plates offer affordability and durability, but carry substantial weight, roughly 8 pounds each. Polyethylene plates provide lighter mass at higher cost. The typical mistake involves purchasing the cheapest option, wearing the vest exactly once, and never training in it again. Comfort and mobility are paramount. If the equipment is too burdensome to wear for 60 continuous minutes, you will not have it equipped when circumstances demand it. The retail price has remained relatively stable for half a decade. The legal accessibility has decisively deteriorated. Purchase quality components discreetly and store them securely. Our penultimate entry at number 2 is equipment half the survival community already deploys incorrectly. Number 2 covers larger portable generator units. Emissions regulations from the Environmental Protection Apparatus have already curtailed specific classifications of small engine equipment. California pioneered this regulatory pathway, and additional states are following in rapid succession. Portable generators, particularly larger models exceeding 3,000 watts, face mounting emissions certification requirements, noise ordinances, and operational time restrictions. In some jurisdictions, operating a portable generator overnight within a residential zone during a power interruption is now a legal violation. The unit you can purchase, currently operate freely, and store without governmental registration may become illegal tomorrow. Inverter generators featuring dual fuel capability in the 3,000 to 5,000 watt range represent the optimal configuration. This wattage class provides sufficient output to power a refrigerator, a freezer, a well pump, and essential lighting simultaneously. These units remain portable enough to relocate and quiet enough to avoid attracting every neighbor within a quarter-mile radius. A propane-exclusive generator becomes useless if propane distribution faces rationing. And a gasoline-only unit is equally worthless during gasoline restrictions. A dual-fuel model accommodates both scenarios. The critical mistake is purchasing a single-fuel device and anchoring your preparedness to a solitary failure point. A quality dual-fuel inverter generator in the 4,000-watt class currently costs between $800 and $900. After California model emissions regulations expand nationally, anticipate either significant price increases from new compliance manufacturing costs or outright sales restrictions on larger capacity units. The number 1 entry on this entire list already faces active legal restriction in 3 states, and the broader population remained almost entirely unaware. Number 1 is standard capacity ammunition magazines. This is the singular item, the most heavily regulated piece of survival apparatus in contemporary American existence, and the legislative trajectory moves in only one direction. Standard capacity feeding devices for common rifle and pistol platforms face legal restrictions in California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, and numerous other jurisdictions. 12 states currently enforce some variant of magazine capacity limitation. Absolutely none of those laws existed 3 decades ago. The reason this matters critically for preparedness is not political posturing. It is purely practical functionality. A magazine constitutes the operational heart of any modern firearm. A rifle without functional feeding devices degrades into a single-shot antique, and magazines are consumable components. Springs lose tension, feed lips deform, and followers fracture. A dedicated shooter cycles through dozens of magazines across a lifetime of practice. If replacement acquisition becomes impossible, your count of functional firearms decreases annually through simple mechanical attrition. Federal statute currently permits civilian standard capacity magazines. State-level legislation overrides this for residents within restricted jurisdictions. However, the manufacturing supply chain adapts business operations to accommodate the largest restrictive marketplace when regulations change. When California modifies a regulatory rule, manufacturers throttle production of non-compliant units to mitigate inventory liability. The constriction happens gradually, then instantaneously. Standard AR-15 pattern magazines currently cost $12 to $15 each. Glock pattern magazines cost $20 to $25. Component quality is paramount. Select Magpul, Lancer, or original equipment manufacturer products and avoid inexpensive polymer imitations. Accumulate a minimum of 10 magazines per platform you possess, 20 if financially feasible. The present cost represents 1/5 of what it will become the very day a federal restriction receives implementation. This constitutes the 11 provisions that governing bodies have already commenced restricting, will continue constraining, and will absolutely prohibit the moment a genuine crisis supplies the political justification to accelerate permanently. Acquiring these provisions now is not irrational fear. It is fundamental risk mitigation, identical to the calculus any prudent business operator performs when observing regulatory changes approaching on the horizon. The individuals who did not view this presentation will find themselves queued at empty pharmacies, vacant firearm retailers, and depleted pool supply aisles 6 weeks into the subsequent crisis, bewildered by how every essential item they required vanished while they hesitated. Please like this content and subscribe to my channel for continuous survival preparedness updates. Here is a question for the comments section. Which of these 11 items represents your most significant stocking deficiency? Drop the number below, and I will highlight the most candid response.